This is Brent Richardson, and welcome to the Business Minutia Podcast, where our focus is on the details of business that are often passed over by traditional classes and leadership training. We focus on the stories of real people who have tried, failed, and learned through their experiences and are willing to share their lessons with others. When I'm looking for how to master something, if I want something to be excellent, one of the ways that I'll do that is looking at other areas of the world that don't relate to my area that are excellent.
Okay.
And I will try to learn as much as I can from those things, right? So in this particular case, this week, we are talking about sending executive summary emails, which is really like an email 201. Right. This is an advanced email technique thing that I wish people would understand. As while I'm talking about it, I wish everybody would understand this. And it took me a while for me to get it. And I would send emails. And if I did get the opportunity to send an email to an executive, I'm talking about somebody who may be 2 or 3 layers up from you in your chain of command. And then I either wouldn't get reaction or wouldn't get response, or I would find out later that I was being made fun of for some of my communication. And that's how I learned, which was a painful way.
What to write and what not to write.
But I look for other areas where what's excellent? What other areas can I take from? And I look at this from, when you're talking about engineering and solving problems, I look for, what way does this problem exist that's already been solved in nature? Because a lot of times just nature solves problems. Your body organically solves problems, and I can learn from those things. This one's maybe not so organic, but the way I learned how to get better at executive summaries and communication or emails to executives and vice presidents was through my background in journalism. And I do have somewhat of a background, barely in journalism, but I would say, I don't know, maybe I can't call it an associate's degree, but I have a borderline associate's degree by proxy because I'm married to a journalist.
There you go.
Now, one of the things that people don't realize, I think I hear a lot of people think of Jamie as just my sidekick on the podcast. No, Jamie does like 90% of the work on the podcast. And the reason for that is a lot of this is journalism production kind of content. And people don't realize is that Jamie's background is in that. And, I'm tell a story. USA Today, a very commonly well-regarded news source. I don't care. Maybe you don't like them. I don't care. That's not the point. It's a significant news source. They announce annually a who's who, kind of the best of junior college students.
Right.
Every junior college, they're really promoting junior college education. And they will announce a best of, like a first team and a second team, All-Americans how many are there? Like 50? 20 across the entire country, okay? Yeah. And you, my beloved listeners, are getting the luxury every week of getting information and knowledge from one of those top 20 from 1997?
From a few years back.
1997.
A few years back.
Yeah. So, and as a result of your journalism prowess, right? Your writing skills, people don't properly appreciate you for that, but your writing is exceptional. Have you been published how many times?
I don't know.
So if you've ever heard of Chicken Soup for the Soul, which is not your favorite thing, right? But she's been published in Chicken Soup for the Soul multiple times. Yeah. In addition to Huffington Post and other places, Dallas Morning News for op-ed pieces. All that to say, you have a lot of credibility in this space. I've learned a lot from you in this space. So we're going to make this almost more of an interview for you because I think people can learn a lot from how to summarize content. I have that I can tend to be very fluffy. Right, I'm being fluffy now because it's verbal. But when it comes to writing an email to my vice president, that fluff needs to go.
Right, because when we got down to writing this episode and thinking through it, every technique that I was suggesting came back to what we learned in journalism, right?
Yeah.
So that probably is the best way to tackle this.
It is. And it's when you're trying to summarize an email to a vice president, like step one is cut everything out.
Right.
It's really cut.
Right.
And that's the most common mistake that people make.
Yep.
So we're going to talk this week a little bit about, I'm going to poke you and get information out of your brain on this topic, because I think the concepts that you apply from journalism will definitely apply here in terms of how we communicate in an email format. Now,
Right.
I think it also translates over into PowerPoint, into presentations, into elevator pitch in the hallway, into other forms of meeting communication. Other forms of communication also applies, but we're going to start here and then we'll see how it applies over for some of the others in future episodes. So let's talk first about what kind of emails I'm talking about. You're sending an email you're responsible for some project and it's gotten good visibility. It's got high impact. You're now sending some emails to people that are well above your pay grade.
Right.
Okay. These are people that are very busy.
Yep.
They don't have time to go hear all the details of whatever you're trying to communicate. What is the right level of information to communicate? That's what we want to talk about.
Right. Right. It's to get you out of what we would call a slush pile. There's a whole lot of emails on that person's desk right now, and you've got to figure out what it is that gets their attention on yours.
And we've talked about this before. This is not the first time we've covered this topic. So we have an email 101 that you should go listen to that covers who should be in it too. There's a lot of good content. I went back and re-listened to part of it to see, okay, what's differentiated that we could talk about here. There's a lot of good content there that talks about who should be on the to list. Don't ever use, blind carbon copy. There's lots of good content. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about kind of the next level. Now you're sending up the chain communication. How does that need to be efficient?
Right. And the first part is definitely going to be that subject line, right? That title. And I think that people make the mistake of typing that subject line first. That subject line is actually the last thing you should type.
Right.
Because you're going to summarize the whole email in that line.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that subject line should be the attention getter. And the way I was always taught to write headlines is you write out everything, a summary of the entire thing in one full sentence. And then you cut words until you have a headline.
And I think that's one of the common themes you'll hear from our conversation is if you can cut it, you should.
Yeah.
If you can cut it, you should. You're constrained in terms of how much time you're going to get from this person.
Right.
So you want to minimize how much content they have to process to get whatever information you're trying to communicate.
Right.
Right. And how important is that? Like when you're trying to, whether it's the subject or the content, how much should a person, do you just start writing things or do you have a plan? Okay, here's my audience. Here's what they care about.
Well, it depends on what your strength is. You can either take it from like a bulleted list, right? And then these are all things I want to include in it. Or you can write the whole thing out like in paragraphs, depending upon, just how your brain works the best. But I would definitely make sure that once you get all of it down, you start cutting down into smaller segments, making sure you know who your audience is and what they actually care about.
Yeah.
What are you trying to get out of them?
Yeah.
If you don't put a call to action in there, you're not going to get a response.
Yeah, I'll give a tip here because I've been burned by this. Fortunately, not in a. I don't have a horror story, but I have been burned. Don't put anybody in the to or CC list when you're developing your email.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Keep it out. Keep all that out. That's a tip. Keep all that out until you've gotten the email the way you like it. Then go add. But at the same time, you need to be conscious of who you're writing to.
Right.
Right. What are their careabouts? What are the things what's their agenda? What are the things that are being important to them? Because that's how you'll decide what to cut, right?
Right. If you have a CEO who is specifically interested in, profit sharing, then you need to make sure you're using language that will definitely be what they want to hear to accomplish that.
I like that you use that term language. I think the language, you want to speak whatever language they're used to speaking.
Right.
And I'm not talking about, English or Spanish or Chinese. I'm talking about the vernacular, the wording that you're using needs to be things that they're familiar with and that they can connect with.
Right.
The purpose is to communicate. If you use a word that they're like, I don't know what you're talking, or usually what it is, you're using a word that has 12 meanings.
Right.
And could trigger them in all kinds of different ways. Your goal is to trigger them the way you want them to be triggered.
Right. And their primary goal may not be to sell your widget. They may not care about your widget.
That's
but
right.
If their primary goal is to make more money, then if you can
for the company,
show them
or whatever their department is.
If you can show them that your widget is going to make more money for the company,
Right.
then you've got a winner.
Which means you need to pick language that they'll process and
Right.
understand, right?
Right.
But again, we've talked about this before. Where's the onus on communication? Is it on the communicator or the person receiving the information? It's on you, the communicator. Your job is to be excellent at this. Your job is to do this well, or you get no engagement from the person, right? So one of the things that's important to me, and I don't know how does this translate into the world of journalism, is if I don't know what my one thing, and there might be two, if I don't know what my one thing is that I want them to either get from the communication from the email or act on, then the whole thing falls apart.
Well, yeah, the bottom line is if you don't know what you're trying to communicate, you can't expect them to understand it. You've got to know it well enough that you can write it in a few sentences.
Yes.
And if you can't do that, you're not ready yet.
And it has to be reflected in the subject line.
Right.
But again, I think to your point, the subject line reminds me very much of headline writing.
Right.
From when we did that back in the day when I did some journalism.
Right.
It very much reminds me of headline writing. We used to do these headline writing competitions.
Yeah.
Where they would give you the concept and then you have to go write. I think that might be a good thing for people to get practice on today. Here's some content, practice writing a headline because that's your subject.
Right. And I think that we live in a world now where everything is kind of clickbaity.
Yeah.
So we don't really understand what quality headlines are.
That's true.
But if you have ever read a headline, clicked on it, and then felt like I was conned, that is not the kind of thing that you want to put in an executive email.
Right.
You want to be straightforward and honest about this is what is in here.
You do not want it to come across as manipulative or gaslighting or anything like that. You just don't want them to feel like they're being manipulated.
Right.
It needs to be very straightforward and very clean, very crisp.
Right. And I mean, using colons makes good sense in your headline or in your subject line, saying, group 14B colon whatever the information is, whatever that key information is.
I've actually never used that, but it does make sense that you could.
The reason you would use that would be now, as soon as they see that, that executive goes, okay, I immediately know what group it is, and then their brain is already wired in that direction.
Right.
Whereas if they just see the headline, if they just see the topic, and they don't know what it's relating to, then they may already be off track.
Which might be good, because a lot of times if I'm getting an email, I'm looking at who the sender is, and then my brain automatically goes, okay, this is about their department or whatever they're known for.
Right.
And if you're communicating something that is not associated with what you're known for, that could create a problem.
Right.
And that subject line, having something key right there to trigger right away, might be something that would be really beneficial.
Yeah.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about one of the most common things that you'll learn in journalism, which is the inverted pyramid, which this to me is the key to writing a good summary like this. What is the inverted pyramid?
The inverted pyramid means that you make sure that all of your information, the key takeaways, are first. It's not like I'm going to bury it way down in the bottom somewhere. You need to state it quickly what it is, because if they only read 2 lines, you need to have them have the takeaway of what the whole thing is about. Once you catch them on those first 2 lines, then they may be interested in moving on to the 3rd one and the 4th one. If you go all the way down to the bottom of the email and they have read the whole thing, and then at the bottom you say, oh, by the way, this is going to make you $10 billion. That's stupid.
You failed. By the way, they're not going to read that. By the way, they're not going to read that.
Right.
Right? Or they probably should be removed from whatever position they're in. If they have that much time, something's going on. This reminds me, and I remember when I learned about the inverted pyramid, right? Because in news writing, you wouldn't read a news article if the most important content was at the bottom of the story.
Right.
You'd be like, what is this person, who wrote this?
Right.
What is going on? It reminds me of the exact opposite of a guy, of a radio host that used to do this show that you loved and I hated.
Yeah.
And it's probably just a part of like the difference between us in terms of I want the basic content right away and then I want to move to the next item.
Right.
And I don't have patience for anything else. Paul Harvey.
Yes.
Which I don't know, he's even alive. I don't think he's alive anymore. But he had this famous show where he would do these feature stories.
The rest of the story.
And that was his famous tagline. And that's the rest of the story.
Right.
What I hated about Paul Harvey is it seemed like the interesting content was at the back end and he led in with a lot of fluff on the front end.
Right.
And as a feature article, that's kind of how you write a feature news
right.
story, right? You come in with some opening that's like, well, a cat jumped off this and landed on a balloon.
Right.
Why do I care about this?
Right.
And then you find out, oh, it's caused the chaos at the party, and as a result, a dictator took over this country. What? Why didn't you lead with that content?
Right.
Yeah.
So when I was in high school, I did a lot of UIL competitions. And what they do in UIL competitions for journalism is they give you this list of just like 5, 10, 15 facts, and then your job is to write a story. And in one competition, you'd write a news story. In one competition, you'd write a feature story. In one competition, you didn't have to write the headline, right? And different people were gifted at different things.
Yep.
An email is a news story.
Yep.
An email is, there's no fluff here. This is just the information. This is the basics. This is your takeaway.
Right.
This is this is your forecast for the day,
Yes.
right? A feature story is a great storyteller. This is what you want to have around a campfire.
That's right.
This is all the fascinating rest of the story information that just makes
Right.
me feel like I love you.
But I
and
got
that-
10 minutes there. I got 15
Yes.
minutes, and I'm having a scotch, and things are good, right?
Right.
I'm happy with that.
That
right?
is a waste of time in an email.
In a work environment, I have so many hours in the day I'm committing to this, and I'm trying to get as much done as I can.
Right.
I don't have time for that.
Right.
Right. You need it. So that's where I think that inverted pyramid becomes outrageously value in helping you structure. So how does a person do that? Would you recommend a person just brainstorm things out and then cut? Or some people just naturally know, here's the key things, and it's all I'm going to put in there.
For me, I will look at all the information that I want to present, and then I'm like, okay, what is the 1 or 2 things that I want somebody to take away?
Right.
That is what you're focusing on. If you have 5 things, either you're not ready
Right.
or this is more than one communication.
Right. Right.
You need to have 1 or 2 things that you're like, this is what I want you to understand
Yes.
about what's going on in my group or project or whatever the email is about.
Yep.
Until you know those 1 or 2 things, you do not need to send an email.
I think the ones that I can quickly glance at, keep in mind, we talked about this in our previous episode on Email 101. They're probably reading this on an iPhone.
Right.
Statistically, more than likely, that's what they're doing. They're looking at this on an iPhone. So they've got to be able to consume that information very quickly.
Right.
Right. So you want it to be something there right away. I can grab it and be like, I understand what we're talking about. I see that 1 point.
Right.
I see that 2 point. Now, starting at the beginning, you've really got a couple of sentences
Right.
at the very beginning to articulate what your purpose is.
That's right.
Right. Whether here's the update on the project. We're on time. Here's the impact. Here's our next step, or something like that. You're capturing that as quickly as you can.
And as specifically as you can. You don't want to say we made a bunch of money. You want to say we made $1.5 million after shipping 437 widgets.
Right.
That is your summary, not the we did really good, boss.
Yeah, no qualitative. If you have quantitative information, you should have that content right there.
That's right,
at the
because
beginning.
numbers pop.
Absolutely.
And then, as long as those numbers are right.
They better be.
Those numbers
yeah.
better
Which goes
be
back
right.
to your point. If you got 5 bullet points and incorrect numbers, you should not be sending this
That's
message.
correct.
Your message should be about when you're going to have that content and when that will be ready.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So if you struggle with this, if you know either you don't have experience with it, or you know you struggle with it, my recommendation would be, so again, don't put anything in the to list.
Right.
Right. Write your content out, and then go back and cut everything that you possibly can.
Right.
If you can cut it, it should be cut. That's maybe the key thing that I'd want you to take away from the entire episode.
Right.
Is if you can cut it, you should cut it. And now if you cut it out and you go, it doesn't make sense anymore, put it back in. That needs
Right.
to be there. But if you can cut it, you should. The challenge becomes most of us will be like, well, I can cut it, but I really feel like they should know. No. No, your job, we talked about connecting with people.
Right.
And how a lot of times, like, somebody will give me a little bit of a thread.
Yeah.
And I'll pull that thread to go learn more about them. And I'm looking for any little thread I can go pull. Your job here is to communicate the basic information. That's a thread that they can pull.
Right.
You want them to follow up with, hey, tell me more.
Right.
Now you can get it. You can use this as an inroad to a one-on-one meeting with a vice president.
Right.
Right. If you'll give the right level of information. If you get all the content and it's in a book,
Right.
they probably won't read it. And if they do, they don't need to come back to you.
Well, and if you are more of a verbal communicator than a written communicator, which a lot of people are, and if you know that about yourself, try like saying it out loud, saying your email out loud, read it out loud.
Right.
If you were to read this to someone else, if someone else is sitting in the room and you're telling them, when they yawn, That's too much information.
Right. This is something that I've gotten good at practicing because I am much more of a verbal communicator than I am a written. But my written communication is succinct, and my
Right.
verbal communication is often not.
Yeah.
Right. But when it comes time to present,
Right.
I have to make sure my verbal communication is succinct. And so one of the ways I'll do that is I'll communicate that to you or somebody else. And and I don't even need feedback from you.
Right.
You don't even need to know what the content is. As I'm communicating it to you, I'm catching it. Yeah, this won't work.
Right.
And I can edit and modify. I think reading that email back to yourself, you're probably going to edit. So, which does go into one of our last questions. How many times do you reread it before you send it?
It depends on who you are. That is the answer to that question. Because I am one that can analyze, and never actually send it out. How are they going to think about this? How are they going to take this? Are they going to like me anymore?
Yeah.
That kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And I edit and tweak. And is that the right word for that? Is that exactly what I'm trying to say? So I don't need to read that many times.
Yeah.
If you are one that is just like vomit on the page, right?
Yeah.
That are just like, blah, 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 you better read it.
That's right.
You better stop and you better read it and read it and read it.
Some folks are analysis paralysis folks. That
Yeah.
they will just be paralyzed staring at things over and over and over. And some people are not, and and for the people who are analysis paralysis, a couple times and you should probably move on.
Yep.
Right. And now you can also get feedback on it if you're really concerned about it.
Right.
Now, I don't ever like to send an email up my chain of command, skipping my boss without my boss having some visibility to what I'm communicating.
Right.
Right now, it also depends on how much of a connection you have with your boss and your level of experience. Right now, I could go communicate that without getting approval from my boss to communicate, but I've been doing this for a long time.
Right.
If you don't, or you haven't, and you're not sure, shoot that message off to your boss and wait. I think it should be all right to get a response in general 24 hours later, but sometimes something's hot. You don't have a choice.
Right.
But in general, you don't want to surprise your boss with that content.
Right.
So shoot them a text, get a phone call, and make sure that's aligned so that you don't surprise people, right? But at the same time, the people who are going to stare at it for an eternity, you need to make a decision and send the thing.
Right.
And if you're, to your point, if you're more prone to not analyzing anything and just shooting from the hip,
Yep.
you probably should read that out loud to another person, process that a little bit,
Right.
and then put people in the to list.
Right.
Right.
Right. And some serious mistakes you can make here is if you are required to have this email by close of business on Friday, you do not start writing this email on Friday at 4:00.
I do, but that's because I've done it for a long time. But it's a terrible strategy. You should definitely not do it. Yeah, by 4:00 on Friday, I'm probably mentally already done. So I also don't do that. But yeah, if I've got something that's that important I'm doing, I want that done by Wednesday.
Yeah.
I want, if I can.
And you don't have to send it then.
That's right.
But that gives you the chance to reread it at 4:00 on Friday before
and
you hit
think
send.
about your to list, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times if you're sending it, we talked about this in the previous episode, but it's worth reiterating because it's super important. Whatever email you send, you should assume it's going out to everyone else.
Right. You should assume it's going to be forwarded.
It's going to be forwarded. And this goes, there's a concept or a thought process for this. It's called the front page of the newspaper concept, which is, would you like this printed on the front page of the newspaper?
Right.
It's the equivalent of what you tell
Right.
your kids when you think this is okay? Is this
Right.
what's acceptable behavior? Well, if you'd like it printed on the front page of the newspaper, then it's probably okay.
Yeah.
And I think the same concept applies here. You got to accept the fact that whatever you're writing here could get blasted up on the front page of the paper or get sent all around the company, and you need to be conscious of that.
Right.
So that might mean you need to get that done by Wednesday, send it to a couple people, think about who else is going to be on that to list, make
Right.
sure they're not going to have an adverse reaction,
Right.
right? Because if somebody has an adverse reaction before, you may have somebody 2 layers up the chain of command you're sending it to, but there could be other people that are in the CC list that could have adverse reactions and reply before they get a chance
Right.
to. You would like to have that understood, what
Right.
their agenda or concerns are before you send that message.
Right.
Right. So you should go, it may take you some time to go circle around and understand what their agendas are, what they might do,
Right.
what they might say, what their opinions are, because you might be able to get in front of that in the communication in some way.
Right. So the easiest way to do this, if you are new to this, is actually write out the email first and then summarize that in an opening paragraph and then summarize that into your title. It's the opposite of what you feel like you ought to do, but that's the easiest way to get this.
And we're not
down.
taught this. This is the opposite of what we've
That's
been taught.
correct. That's
So
correct.
How are we taught? You're teaching the kids to write essays.
Right.
How do you teach them?
I teach them to write out bullet points. I do. I go through all that.
Well, you teach the proper way.
Yeah.
The way most people are taught is 500 words,
Right.
2 pages. Here's the margins. And
Yeah.
that causes people to write in a very fluffy way.
Right. If you're having to write, it was very, 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 very pretty. No.
That was my strategy. I hated English. I hated writing and reading, all that stuff. I liked math. So this class, I just wanted to get out as fast as I could. And if I had to write an essay or a theme or something like this, or a thesis or whatever the fancy
Right.
words they use for just writing some stuff.
Right.
Now it's just an email, but the way I would go do it would always be I would go write the basics, and then I realized I'm probably going to get a B, and it looks like I don't know what I'm doing. So I'd go find a thesaurus and go look up synonyms for words that I had, and then replace those words, and it looked like I knew I was.
Right.
It looked like I knew what I was talking about.
Right. No.
Yeah.
No.
It worked, man. It worked. I learned how to
Golly.
game the system, but it won't work with you. You would failed me.
Totally.
You'd have come back and said, "Hey, what is chrysanthemum? What does that mean?" I'd be like, I looked it up in the thesaurus. It's a $1 word. Do I not get points for that?
And before you send the email, please make sure you double check your twos. Make sure you know that that person is still in charge of the group that you think that person is in charge of.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times I have gone through, and I remember one time very clearly, I was submitting to a magazine and I was putting the proposal out there. And I had looked at the last masthead in the last magazine and I had directed it towards that person. I hit send only the next day to get an email saying that that editor was no longer with the place. And I was like, dadgummit. Double check. Just double check.
Yeah.
Make sure that who you think you're sending it to is still in that spot, because people change.
I've sent plenty of emails to the wrong people, and they
Yeah.
find out that person has the same name as somebody
Right.
else. And if you get lucky, they'll send it to the right one.
Right.
If you get lucky, but it's better to double check and
Yep.
make sure you get it right. You talk about adverbs and adjectives. What does that
Mm-hmm.
mean?
The very, 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 very. I mean, the quickest way to actually cut down the word count in
Is
anything
to cut that stuff.
is to cut
All
that
right.
junk.
So look for your adverbs and adjectives and cut those.
Right.
I see. What's a masthead?
That is, at the front of a magazine, it says that your feature editor is this person and your news editor is this person, and
Okay.
that is, yeah.
I did not know that.
Okay.
I'll cut all that out, but I was just curious.
Yeah.
Masthead. That's what it's called? Well, hey, you learned something new.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, you got that for, hey, you get what you pay for, and baby, it's free. Go write some executive summaries. Go send an email to your CEO this week.
Right. And just so you guys are aware, we are down to our last, a handful of episodes here.
We probably are down to maybe 10 or so in terms of the content we want to put out there. Then we're like, yeah, I think we've covered everything we want to cover. And then we'll put it. Other than that, we're going to start talking about politics. And I don't want to talk about, you know how I feel about politics. I hate it. So we're not going to do
So
it.
if you have any big questions that you want us to cover before we retire this podcast, you gotta reach
Or
out
I'll
to
turn
us.
it into woodworking and I'll talk about, here's how I feel about walnut.
Oh my goodness.
Let me talk to you about purple heartwood and the challenges associated with it.
Flaming purple heartwood.
Purple heartwood. Have a good week, folks.